Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning. This week, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. And also, we have a woman vice presidential candidate. I want to acknowledge that I gave an inaccurate number last week. I said that over 165,000 Americans had died. The actual number was 162,000. And this week, it is 169,000. Now that's a difference of about 7,000. How's off? But those numbers mean lives. Each number represents a death. This is what I mean by the difference between words or numbers and an experience. If one of those numbers represented a person we knew, we would have realized the agony and what it means for 169 Americans to die within a 5-month period. Now, our medical experts know how to correct this, and yet we lack the national leadership to coordinate all this. So I ask you all to listen to the medical authorities, follow their instructions, stay home or stay separate from others, wash your hands, wear a mask, all those things. We would hate to lose anyone we know to this death, which is really unnecessary. 2 weeks ago, we talked about another dimension besides our ordinary lives. I want to bring your attention to a video that our Bishop, Reverend Marvin Harada, made for Yuji Seki and his YouTube channel called Carving the Divine. In it, Reverend Harada uses 2 words that I think represent what I was saying earlier. I've been using the term ordinary life, as we know it, or ordinary truth, and the term true reality, representing the spiritual sacred level. But I like Reverend Harada's terms, which he calls practical level and truth level. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. And last week we talked about Buddhism, that Siddhartha Gautama became Shakyamuni Buddha and he became enlightened. And his teachings were to tell us how the world works and how we work within this world. And that the challenges in life can be mitigated by his teachings, and that we can be liberated because it is our minds which determines this. So Buddhism is about refining the mind to coordinate and be in accordance with interdependence and impermanence. But it is really our conduct and our practice that determines whether we're following his teachings. And his teachings talk about both this practical, ordinary level and the truth level. The Buddha talked about many different ways to accommodate many different people. We hear the number 84,000, which just means an infinite number of ways. He taught why we suffer and how to liberate ourselves. The Four Noble Truths tells us that our suffering is caused by our attachment to our ego, our greed, our ignorance, and our hatred. And for that, the third and fourth Noble Truth, the fourth Noble Truth has the Eightfold Path, the way in which we can reach this liberation. Now, for people at that time, they followed this, but they had to leave ordinary life. And to help them not have attachments, they really had no possessions. They begged for their food. They didn't have any place to live except at the monastery or wherever they were at. And so, in a sense, this was one way of achieving what the Buddha talked about. And this is known as the school of elders or Theravada, and this is a major branch of Buddhism. Today we follow another second branch, a major branch called Mahayana, larger vehicle. And in this area, a Tendai monk named Shinran, about 800 years ago, was following the teachings. But because of his honesty and especially his integrity, he declared that he could not follow the precepts. And then he, in a dream, heard about another teacher, Honen, and so he left the monastery at Mount Hiei. 13th century Japan had many leaders, spiritual leaders, come to the fore. Eisai, Dogen, and Zen, Nichiren, and others. And there was Honen, and he was Shinran's teacher. He was teaching the practice of reciting the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, and in doing so would assure a person a place in the pure realm after his death. Shinran, his follower, had a slightly different idea. He said that this birth in the pure realm was accessible during life. And it was a different approach. And that it still agreed with Honen in that this is something that we receive, it's not achieved. And so it differed from the other schools of Buddhism in that it was not a practice to achieve something, but it was to recognize what we had already achieved. And to do this, we would recite the words Namo Amida Butsu. And I've been making the point that this is an expression of gratitude, which Shinran talked about, and it's not a petition or prayer, which it sometimes seems to be taken from converts or those in America who are unfamiliar with this. And so this is a difficult concept to convey to Americans who have little background in this type of thinking. And so it takes a lot of explanations. And I've tried to condense it into simple words, saying that when we desire something we don't have, we have this attitude of please, and it's a sense of achieving something. But in Shin Buddhism, we can use the word thank you as an expression of gratitude. And this, I think, explains the essence of Shin Buddhism, and you've heard me talk about this many times. And so I'm using some different words. I use, rather than other power, I like to use the term efforts of others. This begins our journey. And it's our journey to really get the experience of what this Namo Amida Butsu might mean. But if we don't practice in this journey, we may really not appreciate the depth of its content. So this shift from please to thank you is basically a first step. It brings you into the right ballpark. You're either in a football stadium or a baseball park. It should be in the right ballpark. So when we start our trip. Now, in order to convey this, I'm using some new terms, and these terms may sound different, sometimes antithetical or even heretical in Shin. But what I've been saying is that this is not a different way, but it's an introductory phase, because I think this is what we may be lacking. There are so many people coming to our talks and yet leaving after a first or second time, because it does sound very confusing. So we do need an easier entry-level way of understanding Shin Buddhism and the path of the Nembutsu. Now, those who are listening here may have vastly different backgrounds in Shin. Those who have been here for decades and listening to many Dharma talks. And then those who are new. And this is why I invite you to come to our Wednesday night Buddhism 123 to again discuss this and hear the opinions of many other people. We have a very nice discussion on Wednesdays. So you can contact a link that Bill Teague will have, I think, on this video following. So there's one point I want to make in today's talk, and that is that there may be an assumption that this birth in the pure realm is just an instantaneous one leap, that at some point we become awake, that we somehow really get the point of all of this. And yet Shinran talks about a provisional stage. In his major work, Kyogyo Shinsho, he has chapter 5 where he talks about true Buddha and true Buddha lands. And then on chapter 6, which is the largest chapter, he talks about the provisional stage. And it's a means or a process of awakening. And so what he talks about is that he uses words, and there are means in which we can really understand this process. And there are what he calls auxiliary practices. And in these auxiliary practices, there is chanting, there is meditation. And so there's often confusion as to what our practice is. A friend just asked about meditation and the fact that we don't seem to promote that in Jodo Shinshu. And yet Shinran talks about this being an auxiliary practice. Our main practice is the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, but then we also have chanting and other things. And so these practices are just a means of becoming closer to this truth level. The word upaya in Japanese is called hoben. This is called a skillful means of teachings. And it just means that the teachings are done in a way to accommodate people at whatever level they're at. The Buddha did this, and Shinran also recognized this. And I've often used the signals here, B and D. Jokingly, I say that this is the Buddha's mudras or hand, and you can see a B and D. To me, what this represents is broader and deeper. That whatever stage we're at, it may be fine, but to always know that there's a broader and deeper meaning and experience of whatever it is we know. Now, I want to give an example of what we're talking about. I played saxophone in high school, but I didn't start in playing the saxophone. I started with this, a recorder. Now this is like a flute, it's got something you blow in, it's got holes and you place your fingers. These fingers holes are similar to a saxophone. Now, if I started out and the teacher played a record or showed me a video of John Coltrane and saw the expertise with which he played, I would be kind of intimidated. I might not want to continue. But my teacher said I was fine playing the recorder. I was doing very well, so I felt very good. Now, I progressed to a saxophone later on in junior high school, and I went and took part in the marching band in high school and the dance band. Now, I didn't progress beyond that, but I really enjoyed playing the saxophone. I don't know if anyone enjoyed listening to me, but I enjoyed it. And so this is like the thank you. The thank you is the recorder. In other words, it's the beginning step. It's just something to learn a little deeper. And that as we progress, we really begin to have a deeper understanding and a deeper experience of what that means. Now, there are other things that we do. As I said, there are auxiliary practices, meditation, chanting. These are called provisional. And there's even donations, which is important. And I've joked that this is something that will get you into the Pure Land much faster and a better place in line. It is a joke, but I want to kind of remind people that if you get any benefit from these talks, there is a place where you can donate, and our temple would really appreciate that. So what Shinran offered was the Dharma to ordinary working people, and it was a path of gratitude. We appreciate what we have to balance the attachment for the desire for what we lack. Much of what we do at these beginning stages are provisional, and we can say they're successful. But these beginning steps lead to a deeper realm, and it leads to the sacred realm which we inhabit but may not be aware of. Practice is something important, but we know we don't do it with perfection. So the Eightfold Path, 6 Paramitas, 5 precepts, are all things that we should follow, that the Buddha talked about. But as Shin Buddhists, as working ordinary people, we know that we cannot achieve them at the level that perhaps the monk might do. But it is something we practice. But our main practice is this Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, realizing that our efforts, both in this practical life and at a sacred level, is due to the efforts of others. This is something we have already received. And so I ask you, until our next session next week, I want you to be aware of what we have received from others. Think of what you have received and keep that in mind. So next week we will be talking about living Shin Buddhism, how we as ordinary working people live Shin Buddhism in 21st century America. Again, we'll be talking about practicing as a Shin Buddhist. So please join me in expressing our deepest appreciation for receiving the Dharma and recognizing the efforts of so many people just for our benefit. Gasho, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.